Hello, I'm Rachael Babin from the Oncology Network. Welcome to the Experts on Point podcast series. How can we change our inner worlds alongside our healthcare systems? How can we integrate trust and kindness into research projects? And how can we build more equity into gastrointestinal cancer care? These were some of the innovative and fascinating topics discussed at the recent AGITG 2023 annual scientific meeting, held in Christchurch, Aotearoa, New Zealand. To review the meeting, I'm joined by the Co-Convenor Dr Ben Lawrence, medical oncologist practising in Auckland, and international speaker, Associate Professor Katherine Garman, who's the Vice Chief of Research in the Division of Gastroenterology at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, USA. And just a reminder that healthcare professionals can access all of our podcasts for free by joining the Oncology Network. Head over to oncologynetwork.com.au. This is Rachael Babin, and this is the Oncology Podcast. Hi, Katie. Hi, Ben. Welcome to the Experts on Point podcast series.
Hi, Rachael.
Hi, Rachael.
So, Ben, you've not been on our podcast before, so I'd like to start with a personal question, if I may, so the audience can get to know you better. Can you tell us something surprising about yourself?
No, I can't. I've day 6 of this conference, and there is nothing surprising about me now. I'm just on existence mode. Whatever I see in front of me is what I do. There is nothing surprising.
Refreshingly honest.
Apologies, a bad start to this podcast.
Not at all. And Katie, now to you, how has your experience of New Zealand been? Have you travelled around whilst you've been here?
Oh, it's been lovely. I arrived on Saturday after a journey from the US, and people here have been incredibly warm and welcoming, and it's been wonderful so far. Christchurch is a beautiful place, and I got to explore the botanical gardens a little bit and have eaten some wonderful food, and I'm looking forward to seeing some more of New Zealand before I head back to the States.
It's such a long journey. It's nice to make the most of it.
Actually, Rachael, that was one of the themes of the conference, is that we are trying to run this conference sustainably, and one of the things we were trying to talk to people about was self-sustainability. So, we do hard jobs, and, we think about environmental sustainability, all of these things with our air miles, but actually, if you get more out of your trip, you've got more out of those air miles, and we've encouraged people to do things that encourage self-sustaining life, like traveling with their trip. So they don't just come for the conference, they come to participate deeply in the conference, and they come to do some self-sustaining work outside of the conference as well. So Katie, I'm super pleased to hear that you're going to be traveling around New Zealand before you leave, so that you can get 2 benefits out of this epic
That's
journey.
right. And I loved when you said that as part of the meeting, Ben. I think it's such an important message right now, especially as we're still all emerging from COVID and people are really suffering from burnout. It came up in several of the sessions. Someone was even asked, wow, that was a really hard case in one of the multidisciplinary case conferences. And how did you take care of yourself after that? And I actually appreciated that as part of this scientific meeting, that was part of the conversation as well, that we have to remember to take care of ourselves and take care of each other and look out for each other.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Now we'll move straight on to the 2023 AGITG ASM, which has just closed. So how was the meeting this year, Ben?
Well, I guess I'm kind of the wrong person to ask because I organised it. So I think it was pretty good. And when I asked people, they said the same thing, but they could have been completely just being nice to me, because that is a sort of a New Zealand thing to do. But I think I liked it. Perhaps we should ask Katie that, because she could be a little more objective. And I'll just turn off my headphones, Katie, so you can be honest.
No, it was fabulous on many levels. And I think the buzz around the meeting, even out of Ben's earshot, was that it was a very successful and really innovative meeting. I think the integration of equity into so many aspects of the meeting really resonated with people and was quite unique and very successful. So congratulations, Ben.
Oh, thanks, Katie. This year in AGITG, we reflected on who we are as an organisation and realised that actually we're made up of lots of different people with lots of different skills and lots of different perspectives. But we don't normally see those people at the conference, so it often ends up being a whole lot of medical oncologists talking about medical oncology things. But this year we changed every session so that every session included people with lived experience of cancer, people who were surgeons, people who were translational scientists, people who were radiation oncologists, people who were medical oncologists, people from different ethnicities, because that's who we are. AGITG now is a big, multifaceted, multi-talented, multidisciplinary group, and we put them all up there on the stage in every session. So it added a real richness and diversity to the conversations in each session.
And why did you choose equity as the main theme for the meeting this year?
Yeah, equity is really important to a lot of us in cancer. And the reason for that is, I guess there's two kind of main parts of equity. The first is in New Zealand is ethnicity, equity for people from different ethnicity, particularly for Māori New Zealanders. And the striking thing that's come out of research over the last few years is that if you're Māori, your survival cancer for cancer is twice as poor as if you're non-Māori. It's 100% worse. It's not like, 5%, 7%, 10%. It's 100. We chase these marginal benefits, and yet the real problem right in front of our face is that we've got a determinant of health which is 100%. We need to address that. And so we felt that our number one priority should be dealing with the most important thing in front of us.
Now, Katie, you presented the translational keynote on diversity and inclusion in translational gastric cancer research. Could you give us a recap of this for listeners who may have missed the session, please?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I have been fortunate enough to work with a really talented team back home in the States, and we have some similar issues in stomach cancer in the United States, as I think exist in New Zealand as well, where there are stark health disparities in the incidence and mortality related to gastric cancer, in that different groups of people tend to have different incidence and their survival may differ as well. And we're not satisfied to just observe that and comment on it, but we want to understand the factors underlying and begin to address them. And to do this, we have been working over the past 3 years to create a new cohort where we're prospectively enrolling research participants in the pre-gastric cancer phases all the way through gastric cancer, but people who are coming for upper endoscopy, who may have an H. pylori infection, which is a major risk factor for stomach cancer and is actually a modifiable risk factor. And we're particularly interested in the different strains of H. pylori and virulence factors associated with that infection, and how that may be transmitted in childhood and can relate to your living conditions and also your access to healthcare. Because if a doctor has never talked to you about gastric symptoms and you haven't been tested for and treated for that infection, it can lead to an increased risk of stomach cancer down the line. So there's also this metaplastic phase in between the infection that some people develop before cancer, and that offers us an opportunity for intervention. But we had a lot of questions about where these virulence factors are in our community, and then that forms a platform for what we can do to address the problem. And we realized we needed to enroll people in our studies who actually are part of the communities who are disproportionately affected by stomach cancer. And to do that, we had to enroll diverse cohorts, and we had to really confront head on things like racism that might affect someone's willingness. And we had to become trustworthy as a team of researchers. And we're still striving to do that all the time. So I talked a little bit about the science and the gastric organoids we make, but I talked more, I think, in the session about what we've learned through our study coordinators, the clinical research coordinators interacting with our participants. And I asked them to reflect with me through some structured questions about why participants choose to enroll in research, why they don't choose to enroll in research, how we can be more inclusive in our process from community engagement, planning the study through screening and enrollment. And I shared some of those reflections with the group. And really some of the themes are, you need to have enough time to connect with people. You need to listen to their experience and understand what our research participants are bringing with them, why they may not trust the healthcare system. And we have to acknowledge those factors. My coordinators talked a lot about approaching people with kindness and really listening and meeting them where they are. And when we do that, it allows us to land in a place of shared decision-making where we can exchange information and come to a place where it feels comfortable to everyone to move forward with the study together.
That's lovely. Thank you. And do you often find with meetings, scientific meetings, that you get a chance to reflect like that and to talk about things so important as kindness?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will say this idea of our shared common humanity and kindness and addressing inequities and becoming trustworthy are not things that we typically talk about in these meetings at all. And yet they're essential to the work that we do. And it was quite refreshing to be here and to see those common themes echoed and to have patients and advocates on the panels as well as really a reminder that we are all in this together. And yeah, I've never been part of a meeting where we did it in the way that we did here. And it was really lovely.
I think that one thing I took from your talk, Katie, was that the problems that you're dealing with are the problems that we're dealing with. And these things are universal. There's particular parallels with Australia, New Zealand, Canada relating to colonization, which are a little bit different to the problems that are in America. I think what we are all have recognized now, though, is that it's, when I said before that survival is poor for Māori, that's not on Māori, that's on people like us who are designing and running this health system and designing and running research. And that's a message that really came through in this conference is that's on us. And we are getting the outcomes that we have designed our system to deliver. It's delivering, but that's because we've designed the system in a way that just doesn't work. So that's been one of the reflections for me. I think we all want to change the world and make it better. I mean, what we recognized in this meeting was that yeah, we can stay idealistic, but part of the world we have to change is our internal world, the one inside us. Recognize our implicit biases and our racism, frankly. We work in organizations now, we recognize and have a racist structure. We all have our biases that is as well-meaning as we are. We need to recognize when we're individually making errors or not stepping up or not reading or not changing our way of doing things. Because it's hard, we've got to take this on as individuals and collectively.
Yeah, that's right. And I think as leaders, it's absolutely on us to acknowledge that we're part of a system that's broken and that's not serving people well. And we have to use our voice to acknowledge that and to work creatively together to address the problems and to delve into the existing research, to not ask the same questions over and over, but to really acknowledge what's already been learned that we just haven't put into effective change yet so that we can effect more change moving forward.
Hey, Katie, did you love that session, the one before you spoke, with that Māori whānau, that's the word for family, who had actually gone seeking scientists to solve the problem of their what seemed like an inherited stomach cancer? Amazing project, eh?
No, I loved it.
Yeah, what they did, Rachel, was they noticed that a lot of young people in their family were dying of stomach cancer and they thought it must be genetic. So they hunted down a genetic researcher. They built a relationship of trust eventually and formalized this. They even had, material transfer agreements because they were wise to the fact that, that their genomes, their whakapapa, this is 25 years ago, by the way, would have value and, that they wanted to not give that away to some faceless university where things might change. They did it in a structured way. And they found that through this project that there was actually a gene that was being passed on called CDH1, which we now know is hereditary diffuse type gastric cancer. And they together, so the researcher, Professor Perry Guilford and his team, and he wasn't a professor then, by the way, he was a postdoc. They published in Science or Nature, and the co-authors were the family. This is a long time ago, and that has led this building of relationship where they have had an ongoing scientific relationship. And because of this, they were able to test, and they showed the number of people who died of cancer each year, which was initially, I think, in this one family, extended family, over 8 or 9 a year, coming down. And now for the last 5 years, there's been no death because the family and the scientist collaborated and found a solution together, had the right trust, were able to implement it, and now it's integrated into our healthcare system.
Yeah, it's a beautiful and very inspiring story. And that partnership that can emerge when there's trust and respect and we acknowledge real problems that are facing the communities where we're trying to care for people. It was a beautiful illustration and just such a fantastic way to begin that session.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Now, Ben, did any other sessions particularly catch your eye?
I think they were universally pretty good. We're trying a new framework, a new way of presenting each session now. So we sort of did learn a little bit as we went, and I think things got slicker as we moved along. We didn't have microphones for almost all the sessions. We used Slido for questions, which allowed people who might not usually ask a question to pipe up, and we could hear from them. And that was part of our equity theme. The first session of the meeting was very moving, I found. What about you, Katie?
Very moving.
Yeah, so we had leading Māori surgeon and Jonathan Koya and a Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Indigenous Strategy at University of Sydney, Lisa Pulver-Jackson, frame up the problem. Why do we need to face up to equity? And they both did it in a gentle, powerful, moving and incredibly skillful way, which I think just caught everyone right from the get-go. And everyone was like, there is a problem we have to solve. We've got to get on this bus. The rest of the meeting was a whole lot of sessions where there are ways of doing that. People had different perspectives of what we could do to try to improve equitable outcomes or equitable access to cancer research. So the last session of this conference was AGITG trying to come up with concrete ways of changing how it behaves around equity. So what are the questions we're going to ask? How are we going to ask them? Who's going to be part of that discussion? How are we going to report back on involvement of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders and Māori in New Zealand? How are we going to respond to Te Tiriti or Waitangi? All of these really big questions. And so we had this excellent panel discussion with feedback and input from the crowd. But then Lorraine Chantrell, our chairperson, responded and made statements around what AGITG is going to do about equity. So I really loved it because the meeting started with a challenge. We went through a lot of content which mixed science and clinic, but also lots of discussion about equity, and then ended up with concrete change for this organisation. We changed the future, hopefully.
And now back to you, Katie. What sessions did you find the most thought-provoking?
Yeah, well, I'll build on what Ben was just saying. I think that last session was quite remarkable in the kind of public moment of institutional introspection for the organization to reflect in such an open way and solicit feedback and ideas to help move things forward. And I was very impressed by that kind of forward thinking. For me, starting on Monday, I attended the beginning of the study coordinator workshop, and then I went to a workshop on just the Mehana model, which was really powerful, hands-on, facilitated workshop. And even though I practice medicine in the States and enroll patients in the States, and I realize that model is not appropriate for everyone, there are many things that I took away. And I think there are echoes in the patients I take care of where having your family come with you and support you through difficult decisions is important. The idea of using videos as part of the consent process to explain the study so that a participant can rewatch that video as many times as needed to understand what we're really asking of participants in the study and allowing them to engage with the material in that kind of a way. I took a lot of things away from that I will bring back home with me. And then, of course, as a translational scientist, seeing the translational scientists embedded in the sessions and reflecting on, as we try to remain nimble and continue to evolve with science, making sure that we're all working together to have the right patient samples and information that we need to continue to pursue discovery science along with the clinical trials was really inspiring as well.
Yeah, and I loved how we had the structure worked. I think it was quite good that every session had translational science in it. So it wasn't that, that got tucked away in a corner of a session, the scientists sitting in a room together for a morning. Actually, there was, a translational scientist speaking in every session. And for clinical people, probably that's what they can handle. About 25 minutes of translation. They enjoy it. They like it. They just find it hard to go beyond that in timeframes, I think. And so when you have 2 hours of translation, you lose a lot of the clinical audience. But I think this way they saw the joy and the excitement of translation in science. It was just these bite-sized bits, and yet it added up to exactly the same amount as we've done in previous sessions.
And we have to learn to talk to each other. I loved Rob's session on multidisciplinary conferences and making sure that there's a scientist at those as well, and that we work together as a team to solve these tricky patient problems. And by being in the same space together, whether it's in these kinds of sessions or in those types of multidisciplinary conferences, the more time we spend together as clinicians and scientists, I think the better we'll do for our patients in the long run.
Yeah, I love it, seeing a patient and imagining, on one shoulder I've got my surgeon who's going to, deal with the problem once I've given some chemo. And the other shoulder, I've got my scientist colleagues who's making me think about the biology of the cancer and how I'm going to target it. And, I learn so much from that interaction with the scientist, and I do bring it to clinical care. So I guess I'm like the vector for my fantastic scientist brains, which is so much cleverer than mine.
Yeah, but I was talking to Rob about this. I think as scientists, when we're at those multidisciplinary conferences, we also learn very clearly what the important clinical questions are. And it makes sure that the research that we're doing is highly relevant. And I think the other voice that's so important to have, that one of the patient advocates was reminding me, is having that patient advocate voice at those conferences as well. And that's how these sessions were all echoed. There were scientists and clinicians and patient advocates. And the same is true for those multidisciplinary conferences where all those voices can come together.
Hey, one other thing we haven't talked about is the other kind of equity we focused on, which is geographical inequity. So, Australia is massive and hardly anyone lives there. It's like, it's people sprinkled across this humongous continent. And even in New Zealand, we have some big distances for people to travel to main centres. And so how do you solve that? And one of the ways around that is teletrials or decentralised trials. And there's this couple of great groups in Australia and Queensland and around northern Victoria who are world leading. And, we learned from them and we heard from their teams of how they're doing this. They have a clinical network structure first, mostly for their clinical care. And they overlay this network of clinical trials, which they run some entirely off-site, so in a distant centre through video or telephone, and others where it's sort of a hybrid model where maybe the first visit's online and then you come to the main centre for the intervention and the follow-up is then online after that. So really powerful and ways of enabling people from remote and rural Australia particularly to participate in cutting-edge research.
Yeah, that accessibility is so critically important.
Yes, it's a nice shout out to my very good friend Craig Underhill, who is an excellent podcaster and his work is amazing.
Yeah, he's like a hero in this podcast, isn't he? I've heard him on it before.
Yeah. And so before we wrap up, Ben, how will the meeting and this equity theme influence next year's meeting?
Well, I hope it influences every year's meeting. One of the things we made people do this time was when they presented their trial results, they had to state how many people in the trial were Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders or Māori, and we made them state how many were regional, rural, and report on that. And sometimes the answer was 0. And sometimes the answer was, we didn't even record that. And so going forward, all trials will be required to report on that. And so it will just become inherent in some of the work that we do. I don't know. There's no theme planned yet, I think, for next year. But Sinna Vatendorst is going to be the convener, which is great. He's an oncologist from Adelaide. The meeting's going to be in Brisbane. And we'll meet in the next week or two and go through the way we did things this year, keep the good, drop the bad, and adjust and learn and continue to grow this. So in terms of equity, Lorraine laid out some of the changes that AGITG are going to make. And there were probably another 20 or so ideas that were put forward which need consideration for inclusion. That will need to be done initially perhaps as a strategic document and then at a board level is to define exactly how far AGITG goes on this equity journey.
Thank you. And back to you, Katie. Were there any final highlights or final thoughts you'd like to mention?
Well, I'm so delighted to have been part of this meeting, and I really feel like it's a little unfair because I think I'm taking away with me much more than I brought, but I'm taking away certainly the joy of collaborating and interacting with talented colleagues internationally, and this reminder that the world is a smaller place than it often feels, and certainly really thinking deeply about this idea of what I can do, what my team can do to continue to be more trustworthy, and some of the big themes about making sure that we're doing impactful research, thinking about the value of the work that we do, the value that our trials provide and the research provides to the community that we're trying to serve. And yeah, just leaving with a lot of gratitude for being able to spend these past few days with you all.
Oh, Katie, that's so humble of you because you contributed so much. And we had other great overseas speakers as well. Prof. Len Saltz from Memorial Sloan Kettering challenged us to look at the trials we're doing and imagine actually implementing them. So if we're doing an expensive, trial of an expensive drug or multiple expensive drugs that really we know are never going to be implementable, is that the best use of our time and our organisation? We had Laura Dawson, a rad-onc from Toronto, who made amazing contributions too, particularly into our multidisciplinary care discussions as well as our own scientific presentation. We had John Laurie from Vancouver, who made us reflect on our lower GI trial portfolio and start to think a little bit more about collaboration, looking outside our organisation to Canadian Clinical Trials Group. The other thing I was going to say that I loved is that the conference dinner was awesome. There was a lot of dancing. There was a debate, which was
hilarious.
And that sort of was the theme was that doctors are the most dangerous animal in the world. And it was Australia versus New Zealand. And, it won't be a surprise to the listeners that New Zealand did win that debate. Although that's a very personal view.
All I know is I laughed so hard, my abdominal muscles were sore. It was very entertaining and a good reminder that after some heavy content, a little infusion of joy goes a long way. It was really delightful.
Hey, and the other thing I really liked is that this has been a 6-day event. We started off with a gutsy challenge. So a group of us walked for 23 kilometres, around some hills outside of Christchurch, which sounded really easy, but my God, it was the longest 23 kilometres of my life. The last hill just kept disappearing in front of me and then another one would appear. We really earned that fundraising money that people very generously donated, and we raised, tens of $1,000s for AGITG innovation grants for next year, which we're proud of. Then we slipped straight into ComNet. So ComNet's guys had their meeting adjacent to ours. So they then went on for 2 days at the same time as these 3 workshop streams on the day before the conference. And then we went into the 3-day conference. So it's been an epic festival of gastrointestinal goodness. And now I'm just thinking about meeting Chris Jackson at the pub because we do need a break.
Another wonderful podcaster, so you'll be able to share some good stories of what it's like from behind the mic.
Yeah, he's a gifted communicator.
So thank you both so much for your time and for sharing all of these beautiful insights with us. And thanks also to the AGITG for putting on such an innovative and thoughtful and important meeting. So it's been a real pleasure speaking to you both.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks so much.
You've been listening to the Oncology Podcast Experts on Point series, brought to you by the Oncology Network. For show notes, head over to www.oncologynetwork.com.au. Registration is free for healthcare professionals and will give you access to exclusive content and educational podcasts. This is Rachael Babin, and this is the Oncology Podcast.